In the background of every chaotic world, in the stillness beneath every noise, there exists a soul who watches without interfering, who holds space without demanding attention. This soul is the silent gatekeeper. Not the loudest in the room, not the most visible, and rarely the one who raises a hand to be seen. And yet, something about their presence changes everything. You don't always notice them, but you feel them. Their energy settles the room. Their gaze softens tension. Their stillness speaks volumes. They do not heal by telling others what to do. They heal by being there when others forget how to be. Their power is not in explanation, but in embodiment. They carry within them a quiet knowing, a spiritual depth that was not learned through books or borrowed wisdom, but carved through their own unraveling. Pain has been their teacher, silence their sanctuary, presence their offering. The silent gatekeeper is not passive. They are attentive. They've walked through inner fire, survived spiritual winters, and emerged not hardened, but softened. Not bitter, but clear. They are grounded, not because they've avoided storms, but because they've let the storms shape them without losing their essence. That's why people feel safe around them, not because they offer solutions, but because they offer sanctuary. When others seek noise to avoid the ache, the gatekeeper leans into the ache. They don't flinch from sorrow. They don't rush healing. They understand that presence is often more powerful than progress. They don't demand that pain disappears. They simply stay. Stay with it. Stay with you. Stay with the space where truth lives, even when it's uncomfortable. In their presence, masks fall away. You find yourself breathing differently, slower, deeper, freer. You realize you don't have to explain your pain to be believed. You don't have to justify your tears to be held. That is their gift. A healing that asks nothing of you but your honesty, and even that they receive without force. They know how sacred your story is, even when you can't find the words to tell it. In a world obsessed with outcomes, they honor the process. In a culture fixated on fixing, they honor the unfolding. In a time where everyone performs, they simply are. And in being, they remind us of who we were before we started trying so hard, before we became someone else to be loved. Before we believed we had to earn rest, peace, or presence. The silent gatekeeper does not wait for applause. Their life is not a performance. Their gift is not glamour, it is grounding. Their mission is not grand, it is essential. They remind us that stillness can be fierce, that softness can be strong, that healing does not always arrive with a bang, but sometimes in a breath. This is the beginning of their story, not a hero's journey in the traditional sense, but a sacred offering in the human one. The gatekeeper doesn't fight the world, they witness it. They don't fix people, they feel them. And in doing so, they help us remember the oldest truth of all: we are already whole beneath the noise. We just forgot. But in their presence, we begin to remember. The path of the silent gatekeeper is not paved in gold or spotlight. It is carved through solitude, forged in moments where there were no witnesses but the stars. No validation, but the slow breath that kept them anchored in the middle of storms. They did not choose this role because it was easy. It chose them in the aching silence after life undid everything they thought they were. It begins in the wilderness when the structures of identity crumble, when belonging feels conditional, when everything that once made sense no longer fits. Most people run from this void. The gatekeeper learned to stay, not because they knew what to do, but because something in them whispered, "Stay here. Don't abandon yourself." And they listened. They sat in the dark until their eyes adjusted. They stayed in the stillness until they could hear something deeper than fear. This is what gives their presence weight. It's not charisma. It's not confidence. It's the kind of gravity born from having been dismantled and still choosing to show up whole. Not polished, not perfect, whole. Their story isn't one of escape, it's one of embrace. They didn't transcend the human experience. They sank into it. And from that depth, they became a vessel, a holder of safe space, a quiet witness to the sacred becoming of others. They are not the center of the stage, nor do they need to be. They stand at the threshold between what was and what will be. They hold open the space where others can fall apart without falling forever. Their wisdom isn't in quick answers, but in asking the right questions. Questions that echo long after the conversation ends. Questions like, what are you afraid to feel? Or what would it mean to trust yourself here? People come to them not always knowing why. Sometimes it's in the middle of chaos. Sometimes in the quiet hour when nothing's technically wrong, but nothing feels right either. And the gatekeeper doesn't rush to solve the mystery. They simply listen not to respond, but to receive. They don't need to be the hero. They are the hearth, the anchor, the pause. Their power lies in how deeply they see. Not just what you say, but what you meant. Not just what you show, but what you hide. And when they look at you, it doesn't feel like judgment. It feels like home, because they have sat with their own shadows long enough not to flinch at yours. They don't speak loudly, but their presence speaks louder than words. In rooms filled with noise, they are the silence that draws attention. In moments of confusion, they are the breath that brings clarity. In grief, they are the steady presence that says, "You don't have to hold this alone." The gatekeeper's mission is not to save, but to stay. Not to lead from above, but to walk beside. Not to change others, but to remind them they were never broken to begin with. Their healing is not loud or linear. It is woven into their being, into the way they listen, the way they pause, the way they simply remain when others leave. They are the ones who remember what we've forgotten, that healing is not something to chase, but something to allow. That sometimes, the most sacred transformation begins when someone simply sits beside you and doesn't turn away. There is a moment in every soul's journey when the old life begins to dissolve, not with fireworks, not with catastrophe, but with a subtle ache. Things that once felt comforting start to feel heavy. Roles that once gave purpose begin to feel suffocating. You look around at the life you've built and feel like a guest inside it. This is the quiet arrival of the in-between, the threshold where one chapter ends, but the next hasn't yet revealed itself. For most, this space is intolerable. We rush to fill it with noise, with plans, with anything that will keep us from feeling the emptiness. But the gatekeeper has learned to stay. They understand that this space is not a void to be escaped, but a womb, a place of gestation, of unmaking, of sacred pause. They know that healing often hides in the very moments we try to rush past. The gatekeeper walks this space not because they are immune to fear, but because they have befriended it. They've made peace with the unknown. They've learned to trust silence, to see value in stillness. While others strive to become, they remember how to be, not passively, not indifferently, but attentively, like a tree that does not push its leaves to grow, but trusts the rhythm of its own roots. Their presence doesn't offer escape, it offers reflection. When you're near them, you don't feel like someone is trying to fix you. You feel like you're being invited home to yourself. You start to hear your own voice again, not the one molded by expectation or fear, but the one buried under layers of survival. Their presence doesn't give you answers, it helps you remember that you were the answer all along. This is the essence of healing through presence. It isn't about doing, it's about being. It's about showing up with such radical honesty and acceptance that it gives others permission to do the same. It's about holding space without needing to change what's inside it. It's about knowing that sometimes what people need most is not advice, but witness. Not direction, but stillness. Not a solution, but someone who sees the storm and stays anyway. Gatekeepers do not impose, they invite. They do not interrupt the silence, they hold it. They do not rush transformation, they trust its timing. And in doing so, they create a kind of sacred container, a room within which others can unravel, remember, and rebuild. But this presence isn't accidental. It is forged. Forged in the moments they had to hold themselves when no one else did. Forged in the quiet breakdowns that taught them how to sit with pain. Forged in the sacred discipline of returning to their breath when the world demanded performance. They are not untouched by struggle, they are shaped by it, softened by it, sanctified by it. The gatekeeper is not rare because their path is exclusive. They are rare because so few are willing to stay that present with their own humanity. It takes immense courage to be a resting place in a world addicted to motion, to be a source of peace in a culture that worships productivity, to be a mirror when everyone else is reaching for masks. And yet, they remain, not because they are perfect, but because they are willing to be quiet in the noise, willing to be still in the rush, willing to offer their presence as a prayer. In that willingness, They become what so many long for, but seldom find a place where it's safe to be real. To become a silent gatekeeper is not to remove yourself from the world, but to meet it differently. While others enter the room looking to impress, they arrive with intention. Their presence is not marked by grand entrances or loud declarations, but by the way the air stills when they walk in. There's no urgency in them, no need to prove or convince. Instead, they bring the kind of quiet that makes people exhale. The kind of quiet that says, you don't need to perform here. You are already enough. This quiet is not emptiness. It is full of depth. It holds the weight of every moment they've survived, every mask they've shed, every truth they've dared to speak when it was easier to stay silent. It is a quiet earned through years of unlearning, of softening, of choosing presence over protection. And yet, their gift is not that they've transcended pain, but that they've allowed pain to teach them. They have been cracked open many times, and through every fracture, they've let the light in. They've let it illuminate the parts they were taught to hide. Shame, fear, longing, they've learned not to exile these things, but to sit with them, to understand their language, to offer them compassion. In doing so, they've made space within themselves for the fullness of being human. When others are drowning in distraction, the gatekeeper listens. When others rush to respond, they wait. Their patience is not passive, it's intentional. They know that wisdom doesn't live in noise. It arrives in the quiet between breaths, in the pause before the reaction, in the space where ego softens and truth can finally speak. They listen not to reply, but to understand, not to fix, but to feel, not to manage, but to hold. And in that listening, something alchemical happens. Others begin to hear themselves. It's not that the gatekeeper gives you your voice. It's that they remind you it was never lost, only buried under layers of noise and survival. There is healing in being witnessed, in being met, not with judgment, but with presence. The silent gatekeeper offers this, not as a performance, but as a practice. A way of being that says you are allowed to exist here fully. You are allowed to bring your mess, your grief, your tenderness. You are allowed to be in process. In a world obsessed with answers, they offer permission to stay in the questions. In a culture that rewards speed, they embody the medicine of slowness. They know that not everything that matters can be measured, that transformation doesn't happen on demand, that some of the most profound healing arrives in the soft, quiet moments that no one else sees. Their life is their message, not because it is perfect, but because it is honest. You can feel the congruence in their presence, the alignment between who they are and how they show up. There is no performance, no distortion, just the hum of integrity, like a steady heartbeat beneath everything they do. And perhaps the most radical thing about them is this: they do not need to be needed. They don't heal for applause. They don't hold space to be admired. Their service is not ego-driven, it is soul-led. They know that the truest offering is not what you do, but who you are when you are fully present. Their quiet presence doesn't demand attention, but it leaves an imprint, a subtle shift, a sacred pause, a memory in the body that says, I was seen, I was safe, I was allowed. And in that moment, something long held begins to soften, to unwind, to heal. There is a subtle strength in choosing to be a presence instead of a performance, in walking through life as a mirror instead of a spotlight. The silent gatekeeper does not seek to dominate a space, but to sanctify it. Wherever they are, there's a sense that something ancient, something tender is being honored, whether it's a conversation, a silence, or the sacred weight of simply being. They have come to understand that healing is not always loud. It's not always a breakthrough or a dramatic release. Sometimes it's the stillness after years of running, the deep breath taken without panic, the quiet meal eaten alone without loneliness. The first time someone feels safe enough to cry in front of you, not because you said the right words, but because you didn't look away. These moments are small on the surface, but within them live seismic shifts, and the gatekeeper doesn't rush them. They know that everyone blooms at their own pace. That presence cannot be forced. It must be invited and then received with reverence. What makes them different is not that they know more, but that they listen more deeply. They know when someone needs words and when they need silence. They know how to sit in the discomfort of not having answers. They are not here to rescue, to fix, to advise their way into significance. They are here to accompany, to bear witness, to hold the lamp while others walk their own path through the dark. Their power is in how they see you, not just your potential, but your pain, not just your strengths, but your shadows. They do not flinch when you show them your brokenness. They do not recoil when your voice shakes. Instead, they lean in, not with pity, but with respect, as if to say, even this part of you is sacred. Because they've made peace with their own mess, they do not fear yours. They know what it means to hold grief in one hand and joy in the other, to wake up on a Monday and feel like you're falling apart and still show up with softness. They know the ache of rebuilding a self that no longer fits inside the old story. They've done it. They're still doing it. They carry a quiet confidence, not the kind that comes from certainty, but from surrender. A confidence rooted in trust in timing, in the unfolding, in the deeper rhythm beneath the chaos. They do not hustle for belonging. They do not perform strength. They rest in the truth that they are already enough and that their presence alone is healing. Others may overlook them, mistake their quiet for weakness, misread their stillness as passivity. But those who truly pay attention will sense it, that sacred undercurrent, that grounded essence that shifts something invisible. Not because the gatekeeper is trying to change anyone, but because when someone stands that deeply in their own truth, they become a permission slip for others to do the same. Their life is not flashy, but it is full of meaning, of mystery, of medicine. The kind that doesn't come in bottles or teachings, but in the way someone listens to you without agenda. The way they remember your pain without trying to erase it. The way they stand beside you while you become. And so, the mission of the silent gatekeeper continues, not in the spotlight, not on stages, but in kitchens, in quiet rooms, in the smallest sacred moments of real human connection. They are not here to save the world. They are here to remind it how to feel again. Healing doesn't always look like joy. Sometimes it looks like exhaustion, like finally collapsing after holding everything together for too long, like crying in a place you used to feel numb. Healing is messy because it is honest, and the silent gatekeeper knows this truth intimately. They do not measure progress by perfection, but by presence. Not by how polished a person looks, but by how willing they are to show up raw. They recognize that the journey home to oneself is often paved with discomfort, detours, and grief. And they do not rush the process. They do not shame the slow. They hold space for the sacred mess of becoming. There is a particular kind of strength required to sit with someone in their sorrow, not trying to lighten it or lift it, but simply honoring its weight. The gatekeeper does this with a rare grace. They don't need to know your whole story to understand your ache. They've sat with their own shadows long enough to recognize the shape of yours. They know that presence is more powerful than perfection, that the most healing words are sometimes not words at all, but a look, a touch, a shared silence. They know the language of the unsaid. They've mastered the art of listening, not to respond, but to receive. Their wisdom is not loud. It doesn't insist or impose. It invites, it breathes, it gives you room to unfold. You may not remember what they said, but you will remember how you felt with them, safe, seen, enough. And in this world that moves so fast, that demands clarity before curiosity, results before rest, and image before integrity, their pace is a rebellion. Their presence is a sanctuary. They remind us that we are not machines, that healing cannot be optimized, that wholeness is not a product, but a process. Their presence is like an open field. You can lay down your weapons here. You can be undone. You can speak your truth and not be fixed. You can whisper your doubts and not be judged. You can cry without being handed a tissue too soon. It's not that they've escaped pain, it's that they've allowed it to reshape them. They've walked through fire and emerged not harder, but softer, not bitter, but wiser, not armored, but open. And that openness becomes a balm to others. They teach by being, not preaching. They lead by standing with, not above. They heal not through control, but through connection. And this is the revolution the world needs. Not more answers, but more presence. Not more saviors, but more witnesses. Because sometimes what breaks us isn't the wound itself, but the silence that followed. The gaze that turned away. The words that never came. The absence of a presence who could simply say, I see you, I'm here. The silent gatekeeper offers that presence, not as a performance, but as a way of life. They do not need a title, a platform, or permission. They only need a moment, and when that moment comes, they meet it fully, humbly, quietly. And in doing so, they change lives. Not through grandeur, but through grace. There is something disarming about someone who doesn't need you to be anything but yourself. In a world where attention is currency and identity is often curated for approval, to be received without expectation is a rare and radical gift. The silent gatekeeper offers exactly that. Not performance, not pretense, but permission. Permission to be uncertain, to be undone, to not have it all figured out. In their presence, you are not a project to be improved. You are a person to be met. They are not here to fix you because they never saw you as broken. They are here to witness, to stand beside your process without needing to speed it up or decorate it with platitudes. That kind of presence does something to you. It strips away your need to explain. It quiets the inner voices that demand you justify your pain. It softens the edges you've had to sharpen just to survive. The gatekeeper knows healing is not linear. That some days you will feel like you've outgrown your past, only to wake the next day aching for what you had to leave behind. They don't flinch when you backslide. They don't panic when you unravel. They simply stay. And in that staying, you begin to trust again not just them, but yourself. Their presence teaches you something no book or sermon can. That being held is not the same as being helped. That sometimes the most transformative thing someone can do is to stop trying to make your experience more comfortable for them or for you, and simply let it be sacred. Let it be enough. You begin to unlearn your compulsion to over-explain. You stop translating your emotions into something more palatable. You start telling the truth, not the dramatic truth that performs your pain for empathy, but the quiet truth that lives in your bones. The kind that needs no audience, only presence. This is where healing really begins. Not in the diagnosis, not in the plan, but in the moment you realize you are still lovable in your unpolished form. You are still worthy when you're unclear. You are still enough when all you've managed to do today is breathe. And so in the stillness they hold, something ancient awakens, a remembering that before you were told who to be, what to fix, how to cope, you simply were. And that being was never too much, never too sensitive, never too strange, just real, just alive, just waiting to be welcomed home. The silent gatekeeper is not rare because they are unreachable. They are rare because so few have the courage to live without masks, to remain open in a world that rewards armor. But when you find them, or when you become one, you begin to see what's possible beyond performance. You begin to believe in a way of living that doesn't rely on striving, but on presence. And maybe that's the healing, not in being changed, but in being met. Not in becoming someone else, but in remembering who you were before the world asked you to forget. In the gaze of someone who doesn't flinch at your truth, you begin to return to yourself, gently, powerfully, completely. There is a quiet kind of alchemy that happens in the company of someone who isn't trying to impress, persuade, or perform. Their silence does not come from withdrawal, but from depth. Their stillness does not signal absence, but presence in its most profound form. The silent gatekeeper carries a frequency that reshapes a room not by force, but by resonance. Without a word, they calibrate the emotional field. Without a lecture, they remind others of their breath, their body, their being. Their gift is not in what they say, but in how they remain. They remain open when others shut down. They remain grounded when chaos rises. They do not absorb the turbulence, they anchor the atmosphere. Their presence becomes a mirror, not for what you pretend to be, but for what you've always been beneath the survival strategies. You begin to notice it when you're around them. Your nervous system relaxes without asking permission. Your mind stops racing to perform intelligence or worthiness. Your breath deepens as if your body remembers it's allowed to rest. This isn't magic, it's attunement. And the gatekeeper doesn't demand it. They simply embody it, because they have done the work. The unseen, uncelebrated work of sitting with their own shadows until they stopped fearing yours. They have held their own grief until it stopped threatening them. They have faced their own silence until it turned into wisdom. That's why they can hold you without needing to rescue or redirect you. They are not distracted by your mess because they have learned to sit in theirs. You remember what it feels like to be human without explanation. You remember what it feels like to cry without apology. You remember that your softness is not a liability, but a portal. That your sensitivity is not a defect, but a compass. That your stillness is not laziness, but listening. What they offer is radical in its simplicity. Space. Space where no one is trying to fix you. Space where you don't owe anyone a tidy narrative. Space where you are not reduced to a role, a reaction, or a result. In this space, healing is not something that is given, it is something that is remembered. And slowly, your own presence begins to shift. You find yourself speaking less, but meaning more. You find yourself moving slower, but with more intention. You begin to inhabit your life instead of chasing it. Because the gatekeeper didn't teach you a new technique, they reminded you of your nature. You realize then that healing is not about becoming better, it's about returning to what's real. And what's real doesn't need to be shouted, it just needs to be allowed. The gatekeeper allows it, and in doing so, gives everyone around them permission to do the same. Their silence becomes a sanctuary. Their gaze becomes a grounding force. Their presence becomes a prayer, not one of words, but of embodiment. A prayer that says, you don't have to perform to be received. You don't have to strive to be worthy. You don't have to speak to be known. You just have to be. You begin to wonder, what would it mean to become that kind of presence for yourself? Not waiting for someone else to be the still point in your storm, but slowly learning to hold space within your own heart. To no longer run from the discomfort, the ache, the void, but to turn toward it with a gentleness you once believed only others could offer. This is the moment you realize you can become your own gatekeeper. At first, it feels strange. You're used to outsourcing steadiness. You're used to reaching for noise to drown out the quiet. But something in you is done performing. Something in you wants to know what lies beneath the silence I've always feared. So you begin, not with grand gestures, but with small acts of attention. You pause before reacting. You place a hand on your chest instead of hurling yourself into distraction. You breathe, not to change your mood, but to witness it. You stop demanding that your feelings make sense, and instead start listening to their textures, their pulses, their stories. You realize you've spent much of your life abandoning yourself for the sake of control. You bypassed grief to appear strong. You suppressed joy to stay safe. You dimmed your truth to remain agreeable. But now you sit. You sit in the dissonance. You sit in the unfinished sentences. You sit in the ache that once terrified you, and you do not run. This is not resignation. It is a deeper kind of engagement. You are learning that you don't have to fix yourself to be with yourself. You are learning that your presence is more healing than your solutions. And in that presence, you begin to shift the energy in your own body, your own mind, your own spirit. You start catching the stories you tell yourself about how unworthy you are unless you're productive, how unloved you are unless you're pleasing, how unsafe you are unless you're in control, and you begin to interrupt them. Not with violence, but with curiosity. You say, I see you. I know why you were born, but you don't get to drive anymore. This is sacred reparenting, not the kind that lectures your inner child, but the kind that crouches down, looks them in the eyes, and says, I've got you now. You don't have to earn your place here. You don't have to shrink. You don't have to scream. I'm not going anywhere. And slowly, your nervous system begins to believe it. The urgency softens, the tightness unwinds. You begin to feel safe not because the world changed, but because your relationship to yourself did. You are no longer your own battlefield. You are becoming your own refuge. You're not chasing enlightenment. You're choosing intimacy with yourself, with your now, with the imperfect, unpolished, messy unfolding of a life that is no longer a performance, but a presence. And as you anchor deeper into your own being, you notice something beautiful. People begin to feel safer around you, not because you fixed them, but because you've learned to be with yourself. And that energy invites others to do the same. You have become a gatekeeper, not through mastery, but through permission. Not through perfection, but through presence. And in a world that screams for attention, your quiet becomes a revolution. There is a sacred energy in those who have sat with their own shadows and emerged with softness, not bitterness. You begin to carry that energy now, not as something you perform, but as something you embody. There is no need to announce it, no need to convince anyone of your transformation. Your stillness speaks for itself. It is in this presence that the silent gatekeeper truly emerges, not as a rescuer, not as a teacher, but as a witness. You are no longer in the business of fixing others, because you know the pain of being fixed. You know the loneliness of having your humanity treated like a problem. So you choose differently. You offer space, not solutions. You offer breath, not answers. In doing so, you disrupt a world addicted to noise. You become a quiet sanctuary in the middle of a storm. People don't always know why they feel different around you. They just feel safe. They feel seen. They feel that they can put their masks down, even if just for a moment. Because something in your presence whispers, you don't have to pretend here. And yet, this role is not glamorous. It is not flashy. It will not always be understood. There will be days when you feel invisible, when your silence is mistaken for weakness, when your boundaries are misread as distance. But you learn to let go of needing to be seen in the ways others are used to seeing. You come to realize that not all light needs to shine brightly. Some light is meant to be steady, warm, tucked into corners where others can rest. This is the light you carry now. It is not the fire of performance, it is the hearth of authenticity. This presence is revolutionary, not because it changes others, but because it invites them to return to themselves. You are no longer the center of attention. You are the space that allows attention to soften, to expand, to turn inward. And yet, the journey isn't linear. There will still be echoes of old habits. Times when you want to reach back for control. Times when silence feels too raw, too empty. But you know now how to stay. You've built a relationship with discomfort. You've made peace with the in-between. You understand that healing isn't about erasing pain. It's about relating to it differently. You learn how to cradle your ache like a fragile truth, rather than trying to silence it. You recognize that your presence isn't about removing struggle, it's about making struggle bearable with kindness. And in all of this, you are becoming a threshold, a space between old stories and new beginnings. A reminder that transformation doesn't always roar, it often whispers. That courage isn't always loud, it's often quiet persistence. The silent gatekeeper knows that presence is medicine, that listening can be more powerful than speaking, that being is sometimes more revolutionary than doing. In a world that constantly pulls people out of themselves, your gentle return inward becomes an act of healing for you and for those lucky enough to sit beside your presence. You begin to notice something unexpected. The less you try to be significant, the more significant your presence becomes. Not in a way that draws applause, but in the way soil quietly holds the roots of a tree. You are no longer trying to be impressive. You are simply being. And in that being, something ancient and trustworthy starts to return your belonging to the world, without needing to earn it. You walk into rooms and no longer scan for how to perform. Instead, you scan for how to stay rooted. You stop measuring your impact by how many people validate you and start noticing the depth of connection you can feel in silence, in a glance, in simply showing up with nothing to prove. This is the invisible revolution of presence. It doesn't trend, it doesn't go viral, but it changes the fabric of everything it touches. And yet, presence is not always peaceful. Being present means feeling the full weight of what is here, now. It means staying open in the face of discomfort. It means letting your heart break open instead of shut down. The silent gatekeeper learns this not from books, but from experience. You know now that wholeness includes pain, and you no longer treat it like a problem to be erased. The more you rest in this space, the more others feel invited to do the same. Not by instruction, but by resonance. You don't need to give people advice, they feel your honesty and begin to trust their own. You don't need to fix their emotions, they sense your spaciousness and start making space for themselves. You are not a guru, you are not a guide, you are a mirror, a clear, steady reflection that says, you are allowed to feel, you are allowed to shift, you are allowed to be human. And that is enough. It becomes clear now. Healing isn't an arrival, it's a way of relating to yourself and the world. It's not a destination where all wounds vanish, but a practice of being with what is, without abandoning yourself. You learn how to hold joy and grief in the same palm, how to sit with contradictions, how to make space for both mystery and meaning. You stop waiting for permission to trust yourself. You stop outsourcing your worth to metrics, milestones, or mirrors. You begin to trust that the path you walk, no matter how quiet or unseen, is deeply sacred. That the presence you carry is enough to shift a room, soften a conflict, or remind someone they are not alone. And now you walk with the weight of that aliveness, not as a burden, but as a gift you offer freely, simply by being fully here, silent, rooted, present, unshakable, not because you resist the world, but because you are finally in rhythm with it. And now you walk with the weight of that aliveness, not as a burden, but as a gift you offer freely, simply by being fully here, silent, rooted, present, unshakable, not because you resist the world, but because you are finally in rhythm with it. There's a profound shift when you realize that healing is not about becoming someone else, it's about finally returning to who you've always been. Beneath the roles, the performances, the projections, there is a presence that has been quietly watching, waiting, enduring. The silent gatekeeper is not some mystical being outside yourself. It is you, the part of you that stood watch while your heart broke. The part of you that whispered, "Keep going," when the noise drowned everything else out. The part that stayed loyal, even when the world made you feel misplaced. And now that you're quieter, slower, softer, you can hear that part more clearly. It doesn't yell, it doesn't beg for attention. It simply reminds you that you've always been whole, even in your mess. That your pain wasn't proof of your brokenness, but evidence of how deeply you feel. And that depth is your superpower. You begin to see the difference between carrying pain and being defined by it. You're no longer a prisoner of your stories, you're the storyteller. You hold the pen now. And not to rewrite the past, but to write forward with intention, with reverence, with clarity. The future is no longer a place you run toward to escape what's behind you. It becomes an unfolding, one breath at a time, led by presence rather than panic. The silent gatekeeper also learns boundaries, not as walls to keep the world out, but as sacred architecture to protect your peace. You say no with compassion now. You walk away without dramatics. You don't need to convince others to see your worth, you've already seen it yourself, and that is enough. People may not understand your stillness. In a world addicted to speed, your slowness may be misread as weakness. In a culture that praises certainty, your questions may sound like doubt. But none of that matters now. You've unhooked your worth from being understood. You've let go of the compulsion to explain your evolution. You're not here to be digestible. You're here to be true. And the beauty is, you begin attracting others who are walking the same quiet revolution. People who value resonance over performance. People who meet you soul to soul, not role to role. There's no need for masks in these spaces, just mutual presence, mutual reverence, mutual return. You stop striving to be seen, and instead you start seeing. You notice the way light plays on the wall, the way a single breath can bring you back into your body, the way stillness is never empty, but full of life that no one else may witness, but you do. This is the healing, not in fanfare, not in finishing, but in fidelity to your own truth. You're no longer living a life scripted by fear. You're living by the rhythm of your own becoming. And in doing so, you become a gatekeeper, not only for your own soul, but for others who are quietly finding the courage to come home to themselves too. And so here you are, standing not at the end, but at a beginning, a place where your silence is no longer a shield, but a sanctuary, where your presence doesn't seek to perform, persuade, or prove, but simply to witness, to hold, to be. You no longer need to hustle for a sense of belonging, because you've finally arrived in yourself. Not in the version shaped by survival, but the one shaped by truth, by tenderness, by trust. The soft power of the silent gatekeeper is not in how loudly they speak, but in how deeply they listen. To themselves, to others, to the spaces in between. They are not the hero of a grand tale, but the steady pulse at the edge of the fire, holding space, holding ground, holding grace. Their presence becomes a kind of invitation to exhale, to unravel, to remember. Healing doesn't come from fixing people. It comes from being with them, without agenda. And that's what the gatekeeper does. They sit beside pain without trying to sanitize it. They honor grief without needing to rush it. They welcome joy without suspicion. They understand that life is not a sequence to control, but a mystery to meet with reverence. You've become fluent in nuance now. You know that peace and sorrow can share the same breath. That uncertainty doesn't mean failure, it just means you're still alive. That not knowing is not a problem, but a portal, a quiet place where something real can finally emerge. You trust the silence now. You're not afraid of the pauses. They are not empty. They are full of presence, full of possibility, full of the pulse of something sacred. And in this kind of presence, you don't need grand declarations. You don't need fireworks. You don't even need to be understood. You're not here to convince anyone. You're here to live honestly, fully, gently. You've stopped chasing clarity like it's a destination. You've started dancing with it like a shifting light. Some days it will bathe you completely. Other days it will hide behind clouds. But it never disappears. It simply changes form, waiting for you to meet it again and again with openness. This is your quiet revolution. You are no longer bound by the illusions of control, of perfection, of endless striving. You've laid down the armor. You've opened your hands. You've remembered that your presence is more than enough. And so you walk forward, not to arrive anywhere, but to remain present everywhere. With yourself, with others, with life. You become the silent gatekeeper, not because you are without voice, but because you've learned the language of stillness, of soul, of sacred becoming. In your quiet way, you heal, not with noise, but with knowing, not with speed, but with steadiness. You are no longer the echo of who the world told you to be. You are the voice that finally said, I am here, I am whole, I am free. And that is the soft, unstoppable power of letting go.